$100,000 take home at the end of the year. That's what most therapists I talk to have in mind when they say a successful, sustainable private practice that they're happy with. You've probably heard other therapists say they charge $150 per session or $200 per session. And whenever you hear this, maybe you've wondered, are they just picking numbers out of thin air? Or is there an actual formula here that lets you pick a rate so that you can take home enough without having to see 40 plus clients a week? So there is actually a formula, and in this video, I'll show you what that formula is and show you how hundreds of therapists in private practice set their rates with confidence. And if you want to make this even easier, you can grab my free rate setting guide. The link for that will be in the description, and it'll give you a nice table where you can figure out what your rate should be in under a couple minutes. So before we begin, some quick ground rules. This is business math that we're going to be talking about today. This is not therapy advice, this is not tax advice, and this is not advice on ethics. Your context matters. Things like location, your specialty, the demand in your area, the cost of living, all of this will factor into the things that we're going to talk about today. So it's not a one-size-fits-all at all. $150 to $200 an hour is a range. It's not a moral statement. So if for access reasons you'd like to charge less than that for certain clients, then all the power to you and you should do that. But make sure to budget for it so that you're not surprised by your take-home at the end of the year. Okay, so here it is. This is the core formula that hundreds of therapists use to decide your rates, and it's probably what you should be using too. One quick thing I want to mention here is you don't want to set your rate based on what your neighbors or your competitors are charging, because you don't know what their specific context is, and they may be completely burnt out, or they might have a completely different situation than your situation. So set your rates based on first principles from the formula that I'm about to share with you, instead of looking at your competitors and then copying them. Okay, so here's how you do it. The first thing you want to do is pick your target take-home income at the end of the year. $100,000 take home at the end of the year. That's what most therapists I talk to have in mind when they say a successful, sustainable private practice that they're happy with. So let's use that as an example. So that's your target net income amount. That does not mean that's how much revenue you should generate at the end of the year to take home that much. First thing you'll want to do is take into account taxes and miscellaneous expenses. I find that 30% is usually a good rule of thumb, and it's around what most private practices I've talked to use. Depending on your area, the cost of living, and all sorts of other factors, the percentage that you choose might be lower or higher. It might be 25% or might be 35%, but I think 30%, if you don't know where to start, is a good number to pick for expenses and taxes. So then you add 30% to your target net income amount, which then gives you a new target of $130,000 per year. So $130,000 per year, that is your target gross revenue amount right now. Next, you'll want to figure out how many weeks out of the year you're going to work. If you're part-time or have a unique schedule, then this is where you'd have to sit down and figure out how many weeks out of the work you're actually working. But if you're full-time, the number that you're going to want to go with is 48 weeks a year. The reason we're not going with 52 weeks is because we want to set aside 4 weeks for just general life, continuing education, PTO, and then just being a human. So now you take your $130,000 per year and you divide that by your 48 weeks. That gets you $2,708.33. So $2,708.33 is how much you need to generate every single week to hit that target. Next, you'll want to decide how many clients you want to see per week. And then all you do is divide your weekly revenue target by the number of clients, and there you go. That's your session rate. So let's do a quick reality check. If you want to see 20 clients per week, then you take your $2,708.33 and divide that by 20 clients. That gives you $135 per session. So that means if you want to take home $100K per year after taxes and expenses, and you're fine with seeing 20 clients a week, then your session rate should be $135 an hour, or per session. Okay, let's do 15 clients now. For 15 clients, you do the same thing. You take your weekly revenue target of $2,708.33 and divide that by 15 clients, which gives you about $180 per session. So again, that means if you want to take home $100K at the end of the year after taxes and expenses, and you want to see 15 clients a week, your session rate is $180 per session. So if you'll notice, these rates are falling right into that $150 to $200 per session rate that most therapists charge. So sustainable private practices that are happy with how much they're taking home didn't arrive at these numbers by accident. Okay, so that's the main formula. That's what you can use to get ballpark estimates for what your rate should be. Now let's talk about a few more subtle things. What about benefits like health insurance or retirement savings? Great question. Let's budget for that. To keep things simple, I'm going to try to account for a number of expenses in one giant bucket. So this is going to cover health insurance, continuing education, retirement savings, and just a disaster situation fund. So for your specific situation, you're going to want to break down how much you expect to spend for health insurance, retirement, PTO, continuing education, all of that, and then get your total number. But as a good rule of thumb, the number that I see most often for new private practice therapists is $20,000. If you don't know where to start, $20,000 is a reasonable guess for how much you should budget for other expenses outside of just taxes. So let's incorporate that back into our formula. So we're going to have to take our $130,000 gross target from before and add $20,000 to that, giving us $150,000 per year. That is our new gross target if we want to have benefits, PTO, continuing education, and all these other things that we mentioned. So then we run the same math. $150,000 divided by 48 weeks gives you $3,125 per week. So that's now your new weekly revenue target. So let's break that down by session rate. If you want to charge $150 per session, then that means you're going to have to see 21 sessions a week to meet that revenue goal. And if you want to charge $200 per session, then you need to see 16 sessions per week to meet that same revenue goal. Again, the formula is the exact same. You take your gross target for the end of the year, divide that by 48, and then divide that by the number of clients that you want to see in any given week. Or if you want to figure out how many clients you should see, starting from your rate, you divide it by your rate instead. What about utilization? Great question. You're not going to keep 100% of the sessions that you schedule. It would be great if you could, but we live in the real world where no-shows happen, cancellations happen, so you should expect to not keep 100% of the sessions that you schedule. So let's budget for that as well. Based on your caseload and what your clients are like, the specific cancellation no-show percentage might be different, but if you don't know where to start, 10% is a reasonable cancellation/no-show rate. So that means for every 10 sessions that you see, one of them is going to either cancel, call in sick, or just not show up. And of course, also depending on your cancellation policy, which by the way, I recommend having at least a 24-hour cancellation policy, which means that if they cancel within 24 hours, you're still going to charge them the full session amount. And then of course, if you have a 48-hour cancellation policy, then this rate would probably be even lower. Anyway, adjust based on your policies and what your clients are like. For the sake of this example, I'm going to go with 10%. So let's figure out how many clients you need to schedule if you want to hit a certain number of sessions that you actually get paid for per week. So the way you do that is if you have a 10% cancellation or no-show rate, then that means 90% of the time you're going to get paid for the sessions that you schedule. So let's say you want to get to 18 sessions per week that you actually get paid for. To figure out how many sessions a week you need to actually schedule to get paid for 18, you take 18 and you divide it by 0.9 for the 90%, and that gives you the number of sessions that you need to schedule. In this case, that's about 20 sessions a week. And that's it. That's the formula that you should use to figure out what your rates should be, roughly speaking. Now, there are a whole host of things that I did not cover in this video that may also be relevant for you. I didn't talk about sliding scale, how you budget for that. I didn't talk about the overhead that comes with using software and EHR and things like that. All of those things might be relevant in your case, in which case you should budget for all of those in the same way that we did for our other expenses and for taxes. And then you divide that number by 48 to figure out how much you need to make per week. Then you divide that by either your target session rate or the number of clients that you want to see per week to figure out what your session rate should be. So let me end with two quick closing thoughts. First, great therapy is not a commodity. Clear outcomes and a well-defined niche justify healthy rates. So you shouldn't feel bad about whatever rate you arrive at based on your target net income. And second, your clients will benefit when you can keep the lights on, take time off for yourself, and then do things outside of therapy to just be human. So don't feel bad about budgeting for those things in your formula. And then finally, if you want to skip doing any math whatsoever, just grab my free rate setting guide from the link in the description, and you'll be able to figure out what your rates should be in under a few minutes. And then if you found this content useful, please subscribe to our channel so that you can get more content like it.